Welcome to Where is Truth? We're so glad that you have joined us. My name is Norm Peckham, and I have with me Dr. Ariel Roth, our scientist, geologist, author, teacher. We're so glad that you're with us here. This is going to be the second in a three-part series on the Genesis flood. This has caused lots of consternation in the scientific community. The whole notion of a flood seems to give them lots of heartburn and frustration, and has caused a great conflict. Why does the idea of a worldwide flood cause them so much problem?
Well, this hits at the very core of the conflict between science and the Bible. Many people wonder, is science correct, is the Bible correct, and so on. And the Genesis flood explains this difference in terms of the fossil record, the layers that we see out there, and it's the event that harmonizes the geological record with the Bible.
So they go out and look at the rocks and the layers. They don't see a flood. So what would be some of the evidences that they could look at, or that we could look at, that would help us understand that a flood might have taken place?
Well, this flood was probably the most horrific and the most astounding event that ever occurred on the earth after creation. And we ought to be able to see that kind of evidence that would favor that. And it was such a tremendous event that it involved most of the fossil record. We have here lots of layers you see here, and a number of fossils in different layers, and these were all involved in this event. In contrast to that, the evolutionists would say, well, no, we have billions of years in these layers, and life evolved gradually over these billions of years. So it's an entirely different viewpoint as you look at these layers.
So they put time with these layers because they feel that the layers were built up by wind and dust and storm, or whatever it is.
Over hundreds of millions of years.
Over hundreds of millions of years.
Billions of years.
And so we're going to look at those layers and try to ascertain whether that could have happened in a much shorter period of time.
Right.
So we see that there are a lot of abundant marine sediments that are out on the continents. How did they get there?
Well,
or where do we find them?
How do you tell you have a marine sediment?
Yeah, good question.
It's quite easy, actually. Your marine sediments come from the ocean. It would involve beach sand, for instance, shells from the ocean. It would involve minerals like calcite and so on that are common to the ocean, in contrast to land type of deposits, which have plants that grow on land, and clays and other factors that are not so common to the ocean. So you can look at the fossils and very easily tell, is this a marine deposit or is this a land type of deposit? And for instance, right here we have some shells, and we've got a clam. You can notice a clam in the middle and some other, and immediately when you see this, you can say, oh, this is from the ocean, because these kind of organisms only live in the ocean.
So if it came from the ocean, it's a marine layer.
Right.
That's simple.
That's all. Now, the interesting thing is that when we look at our Earth, we have continents and we have oceans. And when we look at the continents, we find that the sedimentary layers are 4 times as thick on the continents as they are in the ocean. And this is not what you'd expect. We expect the sediments to go from the continents to the ocean.
You would think so.
But that's not what we have. We have just the opposite. 4 times as many, or I should say 4 times the thickness of sediments on the continents than we have in the oceans.
And yet those, in order to be there at all, those continents had to be lower and underwater.
Well, yes. And this reflects the flood model we've talked about in the last discussion. Look at this picture here. We have continents at the left, We've got the ocean at the right. And you note all kinds of layers on that continent that has those hills and so on.
Yes.
On the ocean, a very thin layer that you see there. And why are all these sediments on the continent instead of the ocean when you'd expect just the opposite? A geologist by the name of Shelton makes this interesting comment.
Oh, let's see here what he says. Marine sedimentary rocks are far more common and widespread on land today than all other kinds of sedimentary rocks. This is one of those simple facts that fairly cry out for explanation and that lie at the heart of man's continuing effort to understand more fully the changing geography of the geologic past.
So we've got more marine material on the continents than we have in the oceans. And
Do our friends, the evolutionists, have an explanation for that?
well, some suggest subduction of the seafloor, but that is way too slow. You know, as he points out, you know, that this lies at the heart of our effort to try and understand what's going on. But if you believe the Bible, you have a very simple answer for this. This is due to this worldwide flood that the Bible describes.
So it's much easier for a creationist who believes in a flood to look at that and say, well, I have an explanation for that than what they have.
I think this is one of the bits of data that favors the biblical flood model of a recent creation and so on. Look, for instance, here at the Grand Canyon. We have, see, number of layers there. Start at the top two layers down to the whitish layer, that's marine material. The whitish layer is land type of deposit. Tops of the reddish layers below are land types of deposits. The bottom of the reddish layers below are marine deposits. And then you have this high cliff, that's marine deposits, and almost everything down to the bottom, near the bottom of the lowest part in the picture there, is marine material. 3/4 of the material that you have in that is marine material. In Grand Canyon, you know, this is 300 miles from the ocean. It's not where we'd expect it.
Oh, so that creates a...
And then you go out in the ocean, there's not as much there in the bottom of the ocean. The layers are very thin in the ocean. So, and another example, Mount Everest, for instance. Did you know Mount Everest is made of marine material?
Way off up there.
Way off up there. Everybody, whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist or a geologist, whatever, agree that Mount Everest was pushed up. In fact, it's still rising right now, about 5 millimeters per year. But it rose much faster after the flood.
At some point in time. And yet, everybody would agree that when those layers that make up Mount Everest were put together, it was underwater because they're sedimentary.
This is marine material. Everest is made out of marine material.
And then it must have raised up.
It rose up. We referred to this flood model in the last discussion we had, and you have 3 different figures there. The top one represents pre-flood, the middle one the flood, and notice that water covered the whole earth as described in the Bible. This is just a proposed model, you understand. And then at the bottom, we have the mountains have gone up and so on, and been pushed up since then. So there's plenty of water to cover the earth. Sometimes say, how are you going to cover Mount Everest? Because you got all this marine material up there. No, the material for Everest was way down.
What kind of forces are generated to push mountains up?
Well, we don't have a good answer for all of this, but some suggest there are circulatory patterns in the crust of the earth and so on, that would continents moving together and pushing the mountains up as they collide. These are some of the things that...
Are sedimentary rocks lighter than those that aren't formed underwater?
A little bit. They are a little bit lighter.
So if you had some lateral pressure of some kind, they'd kind of pop up maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
This would happen here.
Abundant underwater activity on the continents. What do you mean?
Well, We mean that as you look at these layers on the continents, we've got sand, other limestone, coal laid down, and so on. But they appear to be laid down by water. And this is what you'd expect during the flood. And you find evidences of water activity that are more indicative of what you'd expect during the flood than what is going on at present. For instance, you have a picture here of a slope. You have a material floating down the slope. You can see below the bluish area. This is a turbidite, formation of a turbidite. This is a special geological term. Turbidites are only formed underwater.
Okay.
And if you put some sediment at the left in this picture and watch it flow down the slope, when it settles down at the bottom, it's going to form a turbidite. And there are certain characteristics in that turbidite that permit you to tell you, hey, that came in there, and these things could go very fast. Turbidites can be formed at 50 miles per hour.
Ooh.
And they can spread over tremendously widespread areas, like 40,000 square miles for a turbidite that occurred in the North Atlantic recently.
Recently?
Well, 1929.
Okay.
Compared to geologic time.
Yeah, that's recent.
And some of these turbidites are 200 meters thick, laid down in one, very fast layer. Well, when you see a lot of turbidites on the continents, like we have here, for instance, in this picture, all these layers that you see there are turbidites, each one. Some of them thick ones or thin ones. And this is in Switzerland, which is away from the ocean, central part of Western Europe. When you see a lot of these around, it looks like the past has been much more wet
than what it is now.
Yeah. And so this is part of this evidence that we have. And then we have another interesting study that suggests that these sediments, as they were flowing, and you can tell which way it was flowing by certain tests, that they were flowing more or less in the same direction, especially during the lower parts of the fossiliferous record, and suggesting that, hey, we had major continental movement over the continents all in one direction. You have a picture here of North America, and you can recognize it more or less, but in North America, at present, sediments are being deposited in all directions, in lakes and rivers and so on, all directions.
Going every which way.
When you go and look in the fossil record, you see a very dominant direction, like you see right here for the Paleozoic, where they're going from east to west, or from north to south, and some from northeast to southwest. Type of thing, but the dominant direction is down towards the lower left and on that map.
So the whole water current over that whole area was going essentially the same direction when that was formed.
And this is not what's going on the continental, but it's what you'd expect from a major catastrophe like the flood.
Is it always that way, or are some layers even all going another direction?
Well, later on, higher up, the layers tend, at least in North America, tend to go towards the south. Yeah. And then when you get clear up on top, they go in all directions, which we suggest probably the receding waters of the flood. Water's going off the continent, so a deposit was in all directions.
Every direction, okay. Widespread sedimentary deposits. Well, that means that these layers laid down in water covered large areas.
This is something that is almost unbelievable. You have to go out there and look at these layers to see what is going on. But we are dealing with extremely widespread layers compared to the small layers that are laid down at present in the local floods and so on. I have here a picture of 5 of these layers. This happens to be in Steinecker Lake in northeastern Utah. And the top layer is the frontier formation, and that covers 115,000 square miles. Most of the state of Wyoming and part of the state of Utah. The gray layers you see right below it is a Maury Shale that covers some 90,000 square miles. Wow. The Dakota below it, which is a very thin white layer, you can see it across the whole picture. That layer covers 315,000 square miles. And the bottom arrow, well, below that we have first this layer. Cedar Mountain layer. And it covers some 50,000 square miles. And below that we've got the Morrison Formation that covers 400,000 square miles.
Now the implication of that is that when that layer was formed, the water was over 400,000 square miles.
Yeah, to spread to
make it spread out like that.
These are unique layers, and they tend to be spread out. And you'd have tremendous forces to lay out these very thin layers, and they'd have to have a very flat layer to be laid on.
Yeah.
So we're talking very fast activity. With just one river cutting through these, you'd have no spread over that thing. Here's a picture of the western United States, and the dark green area represents the spread of the Dakota Formation.
Dakota Formation. Multiple states.
Yes. 5, 6 states that covered Morrison Formation, went from Canada clear down into Texas.
Huge areas.
There's nothing going on the continent like this. Now, it's what you'd expect from this worldwide Genesis flood that's been described in the Bible.
Carlton Brett, what does he have to say here? The accumulation of the permanent stratigraphic record in many cases involves processes that have not been nor cannot be observed in modern environments. There are extreme events with magnitudes so large and devastating that they have not and probably could not be observed scientifically. Well, that certainly says to me that things were different then than they are now.
Absolutely, and you know, when you have a flood going on, you don't have time to do your scientific work. There are the things that take place. I mean, this keeps you. I mean, this is, you know, and this is what we see in the fossil record. Now, Carlton Brett is not. He doesn't believe in the biblical model per se. He believes in the traditional model, but he looks at these layers out there, and he has to admit, catastrophe.
Incomplete ecosystems. This sounds kind of interesting. What do you have in mind for that?
Well, an incomplete ecosystem is a system that does not permit life to survive. Some forms of life are dependent on others, and unless you have something sufficient for survival, it's not going to work. The simplest thing, and the one we're considering here, is the fact that animals need plants.
Especially plant-eating ones.
Yeah. And of course, some animals eat other animals, but they still get, their original energy comes from plants.
Yes.
And the plants get their energy from the sun. So we look in some of these layers that we've been talking about, and we find that, hey, there's no way that the animals could have survived for the millions of years suggested.
So you've got these fossils, these animals that in this layer, and nothing for them to eat.
Exactly. Here's an example. Grand Canyon again, that whitish layer we referred to earlier. You've got tracks of animals going up, especially in the lower half of that whitish layer. Thousands of tracks. Animals going up, which suggests maybe they're escaping the waters of the flood. Some scientists and others at the Grand Canyon were concerned about this. How do you explain this? And they used to have a sign there that said that, well, the reason that we have tracks going up and virtually none going down is that the animals rolled down and didn't leave any tracks. Now, no one's ever heard of an animal that does this. They finally took the sign down.
Well, I would hope so.
But it does suggest, you know, that maybe this was animals going uphill. But here's a picture of some of the tracks, for instance, from that whitish layer I was telling you about in the last picture. And these are, you can see, well-developed tracks. Yes. They have not found the animals, and they have not found a single plant in that whole layer. How could those animals live for millions of years in that layer without plants for food? You got an incomplete ecosystem.
Yes.
something that suggests, well, no, maybe we're dealing with a major catastrophe here, but not something where you had slow progress going on for millions of years. Here's another example. This is Protoceratops, a picture of the skeleton of one in the museum in Vienna, Austria. Where you see that red arrow pointing, you've got teeth that are flat, grinding type of teeth. When you see those kind of teeth, you can say, this animal ate plants. Well, they studied some of these skeletons in Mongolia, and this is what the scientific report had to say about this. It said, the abundance of an unambiguous herbivore, Protoceratops.
Okay.
So we've got Protoceratops, it's abundant there. Then a little further they say, the absence of well-developed plant colonization is therefore anomalous and baffling. What did these animals eat?
For millions of years. For
millions of years. We've got, in the Morrison Formation, we got the same situation in western United States. You do find a few plants in the Morrison, but what did those huge dinosaurs, and the Morrison's a very rich source of dinosaur skeletons.
It makes it kind of hard to put that together.
It makes it quite difficult to put it together.
And yet, from a creationist standpoint, it's really quite easy.
Well,
from a flood standpoint.
The water is a great sorting agent and may have washed the plants away. And formed some of our collates. or the animals may have been there and stayed there or whatever. But we have to face the fact that we have these areas where we've got the animals, we don't have the plants. How did they survive? It fits better with the suggestion of a full flood type of thing.
Coal deposits. Coal deposits, how do they support the idea of a flood?
Well, our coal deposits have been a puzzle for everybody, but there are some factors that fit very nicely with the flood. Now, traditionally, geologists have suggested coal develops peat bogs and so on very slowly, and if you have the right conditions, and especially right conditions unaltered for a long time, maybe you can develop a significant layer of coal. But there's a significant amount of evidence to suggest, hey, no, coal was probably transported in there. And there are some geologists who agree with this, but the traditional view of coal formation is that it grew there. After the vegetation is grown there, then it's covered up and so on, and it changes to coal. And it doesn't take a lot of time to make coal. In the laboratory, you can make it in a few minutes. A very small amount, of course, but very extreme conditions. So it's a question of temperature and so on. But it doesn't take millions of years to make coal at all. But here's an example of a coal deposit. Now this is soft coal, fairly soft coal. This is in Australia, in Morwell, Australia, and you can note the power lines up on top on the skyline there to give you a scale. This thing is 400 feet deep.
400 feet thick of coal.
And they just do coal out of there and put it into furnaces that provide steam for electric power there in southeastern Australia. Well, what's interesting about this picture here is that if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see some layers, some parallel lines, grayish layers, parallel, one on top of the other. This is typical of water deposit. One layer being laid down on top of the other. So it reflects, a water deposit, which is what you'd expect during the flood.
And not from the plants growing there and then just getting covered up. Yeah.
And then you look at some smaller coal seams like these here in Utah and western United States, and those red arrows point at them. Very parallel. Again, as though they've been laid down by water. And then you can look inside some of those seams and look right at the whitish layer at the end of that red arrow. That is what we call a parting.
Parting.
Parting. It means some sediment was transported in there. It's clay or sand laid in there. And that sediment can be very widespread. One parting in the Kentucky 12 coal deposit in the eastern United States is spread. It's only about half a centimeter to 4 centimeters thick. It's spread over 1,500 square kilometers. 1,500 square kilometers, wow. Which, I mean, this is tremendous activity that we're totally unfamiliar with at present.
We have provided several different evidences that are on our land and are formed underwater that are good evidences, if you want to go out and look at them, that can support a very widespread, maybe even worldwide flood, as we find in the Bible story in Genesis. We will continue this with another session next time on the flood, and we want you to come right back and be with us and join us once again for Where is Truth? If you would like additional free information about these discussions, there is a PowerPoint resource available on the Internet that covers many more details than could be provided in this lecture series. The resource is titled The Bible and Science and is available at scienceandscriptures.com. Be sure to add an S at the end of the word Scriptures to get to the right web page. The Bible and Science resource follows the same sequence of topics as the Where is Truth series, but it is divided into 17 separate discussions instead of the 14 videos of the Where is Truth series. The title of the discussions, an introductory outline, and an index will lead you to the topics you want. The Bible and Science discussions served as the resource for the Where is Truth videos.